I was devastated when my unfaithful wife declared, "You're a loser, and I'm leaving you for a better man." To make matters worse, my kids added, "We don't need you, our new dad is way cooler." But over time, I built a fortune and unleashed an unforgettable reckoning on them all. It was an ordinary Thursday evening in Zurich, one of those days when the mundane rhythm of life creates an illusion of stability. I had just returned home after a long day at the software firm where I worked. The aroma of rosemary and garlic drifted from the kitchen, where Elodie was cooking dinner, a rare event in recent months. Our children, Sophie and Adrian, were in the living room, bickering over which movie to watch. For a fleeting moment, everything seemed normal, like a snapshot of the life we had spent 10 years building together. As we gathered around the dinner table, though, Elodie's demeanor shifted. She didn't join in our usual banter or laugh at Adrian's jokes. Instead, she pushed her food around her plate, her expression tense and distant. "Is everything okay?" I asked, attempting to keep my tone light. She looked up, her eyes cold and detached. "Actually, Lucas, no. We need to talk." The words hung in the air like an executioner's blade. I set down my fork, my stomach churning. "What's going on?" Elodie sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I can't do this anymore. I've been unhappy for years, and I've met someone else. His name is Gabriel. He's everything you're not, successful, ambitious, exciting. I deserve more, and so do the kids." Her words struck me like shards of glass. "What are you saying?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "I'm saying I'm leaving you," she replied matter-of-factly, as if announcing a minor change in dinner plans. "Gabriel and I are moving in together, and the kids are coming with me. You can stay here and keep your sad little life." I glanced at Sophie and Adrian, desperate for some sign of solidarity, but their responses made the betrayal even more gut-wrenching. "Gabriel said he's taking us to Paris next month." "He's way cooler than you, Dad," Adrian smirked. "Yeah," Sophie chimed in, her voice alight with childish enthusiasm. "He bought us new bikes and said he'd teach us how to ride them." The ground beneath me seemed to shift. My wife was leaving, my children were turning against me, and my entire world was collapsing. I wanted to scream, to fight, to beg, but I couldn't. I sat there, paralyzed by the weight of their betrayal. Elodie packed her belongings the next day, moving out with the precision of someone who had planned this for months. She took the kids, leaving me alone in a house that now felt like a mausoleum. Every corner was a painful reminder of our shared life, family photos, the kids' toys, the marks on the wall where we had measured Adrian's height each year. For weeks, I spiraled. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I called in sick to work so often that my boss eventually stopped asking when I'd return. The house was oppressively silent, the kind of quiet that amplifies your darkest thoughts. I tried reaching out to Elodie, pleading to see the kids or talk things through, but she ignored my calls. When I finally got through, her voice dripped with contempt. "Lucas, stop embarrassing yourself. The kids are fine, and they don't need you. Move on with your life." Her words shattered something inside me. I had spent years building a life for her and our family, only to be discarded like an old piece of furniture. But as the weeks turned into months, anger began to eclipse the pain. I realized I had two choices: let her betrayal define me or use it as fuel for my transformation. I chose the latter. Rebuilding my life was grueling. I started with the basics: getting out of bed, eating regular meals, showing up to work. But the fire inside me wouldn't let me settle for mere survival. I was determined to thrive, to prove to myself and to Elodie that I was more than the loser she had so cruelly labeled me. I threw myself into my work as a software developer, tackling every challenging project I could find. I stayed late at the office not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Each line of code I wrote felt like a step forward, a small victory in my journey to reclaim my life. Within a year, my dedication began to pay off. My boss noticed my efforts and offered me a lead position on a groundbreaking AI project. The promotion came with a substantial raise, but more importantly, it reignited a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. With my newfound financial stability, I began investing in emerging tech markets. I studied trends obsessively, making calculated risks that paid off handsomely. My portfolio grew exponentially, and I found myself on the brink of a life I had never imagined, one of true wealth. But success wasn't just about money. I started going to the gym, channeling my anger and frustration into something productive. Every drop of sweat, every extra rep, felt like I was shedding the old version of myself, the broken man Elodie had left behind. I reconnected with old friends, people I had lost touch with during my marriage. They reminded me of who I was before I became a husband and father, before I allowed myself to be consumed by someone else's expectations. Slowly but surely, I began to feel whole again. By the time 2 years had passed, I was unrecognizable, not just physically, but emotionally and professionally. I had moved to a sleek new apartment overlooking Lake Geneva, started my own tech consultancy, and even begun dating again. Life wasn't just good, it was extraordinary. However, as much as I had moved forward, a part of me couldn't let go of how Elodie had humiliated me, how she had turned my own children into weapons against me. I didn't just want to succeed, I wanted her to witness it. I wanted her to realize the enormity of what she had thrown away. Deep down, though, what I truly desired was revenge. 2 years had slipped by since Elodie walked out of my life, and from what I'd heard, she had seemingly moved on. Through mutual acquaintances, whispers reached me about how her picture-perfect life with Gabriel wasn't quite the fairy tale she had envisioned. Gabriel's once thriving business was teetering dangerously close to collapse, and Elodie had resorted to taking on freelance work just to make ends meet. It was a far cry from the luxurious lifestyle she had imagined when she left me. I hadn't gone out of my way to seek information about her life, but one evening, an unexpected message landed in my inbox. It was from Clara, an old mutual friend. The subject line simply read, "You need to see this." Attached was a photo of Elodie and Gabriel at a cafe. Gabriel looked utterly disheveled, his hair unkempt, his shirt crumpled. As for Elodie, the confidence and poise she once radiated were nowhere to be found. Her face looked tired, worn down, and a shadow of the arrogant woman I remembered. Clara's note beneath the photo read, "He's drowning in debt, and she's barely holding it together. Looks like karma finally caught up with them." I stared at that photo for a long time, a storm of emotions stirring within me. Though I had built a life far beyond anything I could have imagined, seeing this image reignited something deep inside me, a buried hunger for justice, for vengeance. They had left me shattered, humiliated, and alone. Now it was my turn to make them feel the weight of their choices. Revenge, however, wouldn't be rash. I wanted it to be meticulous, calculated, and utterly devastating. Over the following weeks, I began to craft a plan, leveraging the skills and connections I had cultivated during my rise to success. Through my network, I discovered Gabriel was desperately seeking investors to save his failing business. He had poured almost all his remaining resources into a high-risk expansion, gambling on securing a major influx of capital to stabilize his company. Creating a shell company, I posed as a potential investor and arranged a series of meetings with Gabriel. The promise of salvation was too alluring for him to resist. In our final meeting, I pretended to show interest in his proposal but carefully expressed doubts about his financial stability. This subtle hesitation was enough to unsettle other potential investors, and within weeks, Gabriel's company was forced into bankruptcy. His downfall had begun. Meanwhile, Elodie had transitioned into freelance event planning after losing her previous job. Her reputation was her most valuable asset, and I knew precisely how to tarnish it. Using another alias, I hired her to organize an extravagant corporate event at a luxury resort. She threw herself into the project, pouring every ounce of effort into impressing the high-profile client she believed I was. But just a week before the event, I cancelled everything, citing dissatisfaction with her work. Word spread quickly in the industry, painting her as unreliable. The gigs dried up, leaving her scrambling to keep afloat. The most rewarding part of my plan, though, involved Sophie and Adrian. I hadn't seen them in years, thanks to Elodie filling their minds with lies about me. But now, with Gabriel out of the picture and Elodie struggling, they began reaching out. Their messages started cautiously but became more open with time. Eventually, I invited them to spend a weekend with me in Geneva. When they arrived, I showed them the life I had rebuilt, the sleek apartment, the thriving businesses, and the connections I had rekindled with old friends. Slowly, I started to rebuild their trust, showing them the strength of the man their mother had vilified. The fallout from my plan was swift and merciless. Gabriel's bankruptcy left him destitute, his assets seized, his reputation irreparably damaged. He tried confronting me, but I had covered my tracks so thoroughly that he couldn't trace anything back to me. He disappeared soon after, leaving Elodie to face the wreckage of their shattered life. Her decline was equally dramatic. With no steady income and mounting debts, she was forced to sell the house she had once flaunted. The friends who once gravitated to her success now avoided her, unwilling to be associated with someone so clearly struggling. One evening, she called me. Her voice trembled with desperation as she pleaded, "Lucas, please. The kids need stability. We're losing everything. Can't you help us?" The irony of her request wasn't lost on me. This was the same woman who had called me a loser, who had destroyed everything I had worked for. But I wasn't the same man she had abandoned. "I'll take care of Sophie and Adrian," I replied coolly. "But as for you, you made your choices. Now live with them." Her sobs echoed through the phone as I hung up, feeling an unexpected sense of closure. She had once been so sure of her superiority, so confident in her victory. But in the end, it was her arrogance that had been her undoing. Months later, Sophie and Adrian moved in with me full-time. The transition wasn't easy, there were years of resentment and misunderstanding to unravel. But we worked through it together. Slowly, they began to see the truth, the man who had never stopped fighting for them, even when it seemed like he had lost everything. One evening, as we sat on the balcony of my apartment overlooking Lake Geneva, Adrian turned to me. "I'm sorry for how I treated you, Dad," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't understand back then. But I do now." Sophie nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "We're proud of you." Their words meant more to me than any success or revenge ever could. For the first time in years, I felt whole. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the lake in hues of gold and crimson, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here, the betrayal, the pain, the vengeance. It had all shaped me into the person I had become. But ultimately, it wasn't revenge that defined me. It was resilience, the ability to rise from the ashes and create something extraordinary.